just because you don't know doesn't mean you can't do it. I really think there's so much I don't know, and I'm doing it kind of blindly, like, I don't, maybe, like, let's try it. But then when you realize so many people don't know what they're doing, they're just doing it with a smile. So don't think if you don't have the right skill, if you don't have the education that's required, it doesn't mean you can't do it.
Hey everyone, it's Samantha, and welcome back to another episode of Paths. Paths is a program of LGBT tech that is focused on visibility and inclusion of LGBTQ+ folks in STEAM. Paths podcast allows us to talk to professionals across the LGBTQ+ community in various STEAM fields and get to hear their stories, from their background to how they got to where they are, to their advice for others on how to get into their fields and industries. Everyone's paths vary, are unique, and are incredibly insightful. Before we jump into this month's episode, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to show your support and never miss another episode.
How are you?
Good. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to speaking with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Awesome. So just to get started, could you introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, and how your friends would describe you?
Ooh, I love that last question. My name's Alyssa. I use she, her, AJ pronouns. And my friends would describe me as chaotic good. I'm a Virgo. I'm an eldest daughter. I'm extremely chaotic in the sense that I'm always doing something, but there's usually an intention behind it. And I'm a serial hobbyist. In being an eldest daughter, I have a 10-year age gap with my sisters, and I think it's one of the top notes of my personality. I absolutely adore my younger siblings, and I tend to treat people in my life almost like they're my younger siblings too.
I feel that with the serial hobbyist, I always say my hobby is collecting hobbies.
Yes, I get that.
They don't last long, but they're there.
It's always in 3-month increments, but I know like after these 3 months, I'll have something else that I'm excited about.
100%.
Yeah.
And how do you identify within the LGBTQ+ community and any other identities that may be important for you to share?
Mm-hmm. I identify as both queer and bisexual. It really depends on the space that I'm in. I think other identities outside of my queerness are how my queerness intersect with my cultural identity. So I'm Latina, specifically Colombian and Puerto Rican. And something that took me a bit of time to come to terms with in my own queer journey was figuring out how do I step into my queerness and into my cultural identity and have spaces where both of these feel nurtured and seen.
Yeah, I completely relate. As a queer Latina, like, it's also the cultural factor of how others in our culture perceive us, and that can also be parallel to other cultures. But
I think it's a journey for a lot of queer people of color too. When you are navigating your queerness, you want to be in spaces just itching and making that identity feel like it belongs, sometimes at the expense of other identities. So it's like, how do I do this where I feel like I belong in multiple parts of who I am? Because so many of us contain multitudes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Awesome. And then could you tell us a little bit about what you do professionally and then how you would describe that to someone who's never heard of it?
Yes. Well, I feel like on the serial hobbyist train, I have a couple of things I do. So full-time, I do diversity and inclusion work. It's what I've spent most of my professional career doing. I work in tech. So this looks different every week, but it can range from what are our hiring practices to what are the company policies to what are programs that we're building to build equity in the company for underrepresented groups. I'm also the founder of Queer Latinas, which is an in-person and online community for queer Latinos across the United States that became something really big completely on accident, but I think it goes into the power of building community online. And I also create content just around being an eldest daughter and making space for people that have these intersectional identities and want to feel seen and heard too.
Yeah, I guess following up with both of those, what connections have you seen between both like your content creation, your community work, and then the DEI work that you do professionally? Like, how do they feed into each other?
I feel like it's all one and the same, weird enough. I've asked myself, like, what is the tie-in between these three things and just all of the things that I do? And I think ultimately the goal is to build a space where people feel like they belong. Mm-hmm. So whether it's where you fall in your birth order, your cultural identity, your queerness, being out at work can go beyond queerness. It's like, do I feel safe to share some of the traditions that my family does during New Year's with my coworkers? And at the root, it's about creating a space where people feel like they belong. And that has to come from a place of authenticity. Mm-hmm. I found that people feel like they belong even around those that don't have the right language or the right understanding. As long as somebody is their whole self and is curious, that's enough.
Yeah, 100%. I heavily, I was talking about this earlier with a different interviewee, where it really has to come from authenticity.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it doesn't, it feels ungenuine and it doesn't feel like you actually belong. It's just on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you're living now, and can you describe what community has been like for you in both of those environments?
Well, first of all, we're in New York right now. Yeah. I'm from Long Island. I'm born and raised in Long Island. I've spent most of my life there before moving to Brooklyn. What community looked like, I feel like I had a pretty unique experience, but in a positive way. My mom founded a Latina sorority. So she had all of her friends around when I was a kid. My mom was the first in her friend group to have a child. There's like a massive age gap between myself and my other family friends that are in my generation. What community looks like to me is it's really centered in friendship and it's centered in collectivism. My parents knew like they couldn't do this alone. They had the help of my grandparents, the help of my mom's friends, and that really shaped, as an adult, how I go about community and friendship. I don't assume if one of my friends decides to start a family, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm parent number 3 here. I don't assume that we need to do things alone. Ironically, I also am like the classic eldest daughter that's like, no, but I can do it alone. You just can't. So yeah, community, I think it's definitely an act of resistance. Growing up in an individualistic society, having to push back against that and to be like, no, we need each other. And, you know, if somebody's struggling to raise $1,000, one way that I grew up was, even if we didn't have that 1,000, we knew 40 people that could give $25 and get to that goal. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I treat community now, is you don't have to do it alone. And I expect people to reach out when they need help.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I saw something online maybe a couple of years ago where it said, everyone wants a village, but you need to be a villager. And I think there's also there is such a beauty to creating that community with your neighbors, to the people that you connect with, and just really, really building that and making it feel like a family around your network in a way of like, not toxic family necessarily, but just being able to support each other when needed. And that's something that's very beautiful to see.
Yeah.
And then now that you mentioned that, like, your mom created this Latina sorority, do you think that had to do with anything with you creating Queer Latinas?
You know, it's funny. We've been talking about it, how we both did our own, like we were passionate about and how similar these two things are. I do think it inspired me creating Queer Latinas, but when I created it, I didn't feel safe enough to share with my family that I was doing this thing. I was creating this community. I was spending a chunk of my time one day of the week, each week, like hosting meetups to meet other queer Latinos. It wasn't until I stepped more into, well, honestly, it was a mix of both my parents being more curious and me being like, well, this is a part of what I do, that I realized my mom and I are really similar, not in our own queerness, but in how we view the world and how we view connecting with others. I really believe, whether you are my closest friend or a stranger, respect in community is so important, where it's like, even if we're like, hey, actually, we don't get along, that's completely okay. Know that I will still provide you a meal. And that's something that my mom she showed me throughout my childhood. And I think I didn't realize how much that impacted me until I created my own community. And it's been a place of really connecting with her, because she understands the stresses of trying to build this thing, feeling like you're doing it alone, realizing you need to lean on other people for it to grow, and also caring about, like, I want to uplift this community that I'm a part of. So she's been extremely supportive as the organization has grown.
I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then, do you remember when you first started understanding your LGBTQ plus identity?
Yeah, I feel like the first thing that comes to mind was when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I would go on YouTube and be like, girls kissing, not knowing you can't delete history. I feel like this is also a canon event for so many people, so I feel really seen in sharing that. In terms of understanding it, it took probably until college. I went to a really work-focused college where I was like not even dating. I wasn't even thinking about flirting. It was just like work all of the time. And then I was a senior in college, and I had some free time and some freedom. And I'm like actually looking at the people around me, and I was like, wait a minute. Well, this is not new, but I've spent years being so hyper-focused on work, so focused on fulfilling the role of being like a high-achieving eldest daughter, that it just took me later in my teens to acknowledge my queerness. And then after that, I had moved back home. The pandemic happened shortly after. And I actually think the pandemic was a great time for a lot of queer folks to have the time to sit in the why. Like, why am I only dating one gender? Am I attracted to this gender? Why am I not displaying curiosity towards other genders that I know I'm attracted to? So it's really been a journey. I feel like every few years there's something that I'm learning, but the first understanding was when I was a little kid. And my aunt, who's also queer, I remember she found these YouTube videos and also understood and was like, we don't need to tell mom and dad about that. So I really, as I came to terms with like coming out to my own family, it was extremely nice to have a family member that was like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and it's like, you know that at least someone's got you.
Yeah. I know YouTube didn't exist when she was a kid, but I'm like, I'm sure there was some version of that was happening.
Yeah, some magazine.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then I guess that kind of ties into the next question, which is, did you have any queer spaces that you grew up with?
You know, in high school, I had the Gay Straight Alliance, and I was a classic, like, huge ally that was a part of that, being like, yes, my gosh. The Valentina turned actual.
Ally.
Yeah. And in college, not really, because it was so focused on work that the first queer space I had was the one I created. Not even Queer Latinas. I downloaded an app to make friends, and I was like, I want more queer friends. Like, while I was still questioning my own queerness, I just knew I wanted more queer friends. And some of my closest friends I met through this app. It was Bumble Friends. And yeah, it was like a bunch of people that were also in similar stages of their journey. I think that's so important in building community, is if you are questioning your queerness or you're new to it, can you find other people that are in the same stage too? So much growth has happened over the past few years just in making friends during that really vulnerable part of my journey. I think when you're experiencing change, even if you're aware of what that change is, or if you're aware of like how you identify, or you're still figuring it out, when you're in a vulnerable state, it's so important to be around other people that are also navigating that too.
Yeah, I think that also, we've talked about it too, where it's meeting people where they're at, and like that also translates not only to who you're connecting with, but like the people you surround yourself with, of like having people that meet you where you're at and have that understanding and similarities. Amazing. And then, did you have any role models growing up that we'd like to talk about?
Ooh. Well, my mom is obviously one. I think that I really attribute a lot of why I do what I do to what she did and how much she centered friendship. I know that's like I'm like, I'll give a famous person, please. But my one thing about my mom is that I think it was extremely progressive for her generation to center friendship so much, to have someone that was like, you don't need to do the relationship thing. Like, at the end of the day, it's your friends. And so to enter my young adulthood with that, to realize how many people center romance and center finding their person, which I understand, it's all we've been fed, but to have had the complete opposite in my childhood, I'm like, wait, no, but do you have your community first to really catch you when you fall? So I really just like admire her so much for that. It's mostly people that are close to me in my life. I think I like my role models are people that I feel connected to and that I'm inspired to get to know them more. So while I want to be like Shakira so badly, because that's like, that was the one that was like, she keeps coming up and like, I can't say that in this interview. I know I can. There's there's a little bit of controversiality in that too. But as a kid, I actually was really, really inspired by Shakira. I took belly dancing classes. I like classic Colombian child who like used to, for those that know, Shakira actually used to be really punk. She had black hair. She would wear dark. Yes. And so I, as a kid, would put like a cross in red on my forehead, trying to embrace punk Shakira. I think she like really influenced my confidence in being able to be just like a she-wolf. But yeah, she's wonderful. But at the end of the day, my mom is the one that really inspires me a lot.
I agree. Yeah. And then like I relate to the Shakira thing, and it just, there's a difference also between like who they are as a person versus how they influence you as a child.
Yes.
And I think
that part.
Differentiator.
I love that.
Also, how they've grown and they've pivoted might not be the same way you align now.
Yes.
But they were still key in a certain moment of your life.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's who she was when I was a kid, or that version I grew up with, like that was an inspiration. So
I 100% relate to that. I think that was my first concert too growing up.
Yes, me too. It was my first concert. Yes. Yeah. She had one recently. My mom went to, but I think it was in Jersey, but I didn't go. Yeah.
And then we'll pivot over a little bit to talk more about your career. So was there a moment that you knew that you wanted to enter tech or the DEI space?
Yes. So I actually wanted to enter tech before I wanted to enter the DEI space. I started my career in consulting. I was doing Salesforce implementations, and it just wasn't for me. I studied business and Latino studies, and then went into this tech-ish space, but it was really consulting. And I was really interested in product management because part of my first career was figuring out how to be a product owner. How do we figure out what requirements are most important, take the most time, and are the highest priority to deliver for our customers? And from there, I read Cracking the PM Interview. I was only applying to associate PM roles. And I had one DEI role, one singular DEI role that just looked interesting, and I applied to it. And then I ended up getting the interview. A couple years later, I've been in 3 different companies doing DEI work now. But I also felt like it was just a sign. I was applying and wanting to do this PM work, but I didn't really know too much about DEI, but I did know that the things I did in college, the organizations I was a part of, the Latino Student Union, the Black Student Union, as well as the volunteer work that I had done, I was like, oh, this is kind of aligned. Like, this sounds really cool. How do I build employee resource groups? How do I better understand DEI strategy? Why is it important? How do you tell the same story 10 different ways to build influence? As many people know, like, DEI is hard work because it's not creating the program, it's getting buy-in for the program that's so hard. So I knew through that interview process, like, I wanted to learn a new skill, and I felt passionate about it. I just didn't know I could build a career from it. And I had gone through the process asking the hiring manager, I'm like, why? Like, why? And she's like, because your resume and the work that you do has shown me that you can pick up different skills. And that's all I want right now. You don't need to have been in a DEI role before, because I hadn't been. I just want somebody that can pick up different skills, which I think is extremely important now in the age of AI. But yeah, that's how I pivoted into DEI. And then I pivoted into tech because I started in supply chain, mostly out of curiosity. I felt like there's been so much talk about big tech and these FANG companies and all of these different employee programs that were created, different people policies, different ways of working. And because I was now in the people team space, I was like, I want to be at a company where I get to see under the hood, what are these policies that they're creating and why? Because oftentimes we talk about, oh, this company is like fully remote, or this company has unlimited paid time off, but there's research and psychology behind it. So I wanted to better understand, okay, through the lens of DEI, why do these programs exist? And it's been fascinating being in tech. Tech attracts some of the most diverse ways of thinking I've ever experienced, because I think it requires so much innovation. If you work in consumer products, consumer goods, in supply chain, the rate of change is a bit slower unless it's around a specific tech stack or tech itself. So to work at that company, you get to see so many different ways of working and ways of thinking. That's been really exciting.
I have like 3 follow-up questions from this.
Yes, no, please.
I think, first of all, I know that you said that you kind of had 3 different roles.
Yeah.
So now that you've been in it for so long, like, what are those changes that you've seen with DEI, or how have you understood it now that you've kind of been in it?
Oh my gosh, there has been so much change. Where do we start? I think that DEI is basically storytelling. And the way the story has been told is the biggest change. The work hasn't changed that much, but the end, if we think about all of the filters from, if you're on the DEI team, which is usually a center of excellence, what does that mean? That means that you're actually not directly on the people team, but you influence every department on the people team, from HR, because we're not a part of HR. Some people think we are. From HR to talent acquisition to learning and development. And I found that the bottom story, the story that gets to employees, has been the biggest change over the years. A few years ago, specifically after the murder of George Floyd, I think there was a level of intense transparency from what the DEI team did to what employees heard was one and the same. And now what I'm seeing is it's what the DEI team, the idea we have, to what does people leadership think, to what does the CEO think, to what do we share with leaders and what do they share with their employees. So it's a lot more filtered. The interesting thing to me, though, is the work itself hasn't changed that much. But we always see in the news, or what we see about companies either rebranding or removing their DEI teams, is like, that's the end result. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Don't get me wrong. Companies that are removing their DEI teams, I'm like, that's a problem. You can't do that. But for companies that are rebranding, that rebrand is a reaction to changes in the presidential administration, changes in Supreme Court cases. We see the end, what the end result is, but there's actually so much more happening that I'm always so curious. I'm like, oh, I wonder what the team is doing and if they're still doing the same work, but they have to say it differently because of changes.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's kind of going back to like the SEO, right? And like changing words for it not to get caught, or like to be able to keep doing the work, but doing it on the down low without getting flagged. But I have more questions.
Oh my God, please.
Which is, you were talking about buy-in and like how that's kind of your biggest struggle when it comes to DEI. And I feel like that we relate to that as well. It's like, as a queer org in the tech space, where it's kind of having to sell yourself and sell the understanding of why the work is so important. So I guess from your experience, what are the main points of focus to get that buy-in? Or what do you talk about to get that buy-in?
Okay, there's so many different ways to get buy-in. To me, I view it as like, am I talking to a leader? Am I talking to an external organization? Am I talking to a peer? Some of the ways that I've been able to get buy-in is understanding my audience, one, and what matters to them. So if I'm talking to a leader, if I'm talking to a peer, right, you might just understand on a compassionate level why DEI is important. I don't really have to explain it to you. I'm like, okay, Pride Month is happening. We want to partner with a couple of nonprofits in New York because we care. And they're like, of course. If I'm talking to a leader, what we used to do in DEI was talk about what's the value add? What is the change in revenue? What's the change in employee retention? Where I've seen things change is now what we talk about is, what do you lose by not doing it? So instead of saying, oh my gosh, like you gain X amount of dollars, I'm like, hey, if you don't put valuable pride programming, 40% of our employees identify as LGBTQ+, and they're really engaged in our ERG programming, you're risking losing employees. So that has been a really interesting shift. I'm not one that likes to fearmonger, but I really sit with like, what does my audience care about? And if somebody is in talent acquisition or is a leader and they know it's extremely costly to lose employees, that's how I'll share it to them. But with a peer, I still want the buy-in and do you like this program? And just on a compassion level, they are like, yes, let's do it. So
I love that. And then going a little bit back to what you were saying of how you got into this role and how your hiring manager was saying how you just had all these skills, right? And you were able to adapt to these skills. And I think that's something we try to touch on too. It's one, it's reskilling, but it's also identifying your transferable skills and how to get into that. So kind of what would be your advice for that, in that sense of how do you reskill? I know we talked about us being hobbyists and finding those skills, but how does that translate over into like your professional life?
I'm like, have ADHD. I don't know. It's really helpful. No, I think what's so important is being curious. I've told hiring managers, I've told peers that ultimately when you see candidates, are they curious and wanting to learn? So what I've done in times between jobs or even at jobs myself is I always want to learn something that excites me. I think it is also so important. Part of the work I do now is DEI, but learning and development and figuring out what are all these different AI tools that we're going to implement at a company-wide level. I've tested so many of them. It's like, it's just AI overload. But what we've seen is that companies are actually switching to wanting more generalists than they want subject matter experts. So my advice is like, how do you know a little bit about everything? And how do you find the things you actually care to know about? It doesn't have to be traditional skill sets anymore. You don't have to learn how to code. You don't have to learn you don't have to have an SHRM certification, which is an HR certification. Instead, it's just understanding, how do I have a breadth of knowledge? Almost like, how am I a mini entrepreneur within a company that does a little bit of operations, of marketing, of learning and development, of DEI? And how do I showcase myself as like a mini business for a company that might want to hire me?
I completely relate to that. I think we also have this conversation with our mentees of just like personal branding, but not in the sense of selling yourself as a brand, but almost kind of it is, because it is kind of your own personal brand as a professional. Like, how are you presenting yourself? How are you presenting your skills? How are you pitching yourself to? It could be an employer. It could be to a promotion. It could be to just any opportunity that comes up. And a
big gap I've noticed in my own professional career is I recommend this to folks, is write down 3 adjectives that you think you are and 3 adjectives you want to be. So I would say, like, I am adaptable. I am fast-paced. I love to collaborate, but I want to be influential, strategic, and a leader. So seeing where's the gap and how do I find roles or people within a company to help bridge that gap in who I want to become.
100%. And then on a personal note, what has your experience been navigating like STEAM spaces in the tech field as a queer professional?
Ooh, that part. I think the hardest coming out is at work, because it's not one that you're not required to come out to anyone, but there's just something so disconnected about coming out and work. I have a friend, a coworker who she's married, and she said, like, with my wife, like, sometimes I've been in spaces where I'm like, yeah, my spouse or my husband. And it's like, you just get so like, oh, I didn't do that thing. Yeah. But I think what's so important is to be at companies that have these spaces, like ERGs or employee resource groups are different intersectional identities that are supported at the company. So I remember 2 jobs ago, it was the first time I had come out, and my boss didn't even know. And it was like in an pride group event that she was on. And I was just like, yeah, I don't really feel comfortable like identifying as bisexual in a workplace, because if I'm dating someone and I use he, him pronouns, no one questions it. But then if I throw she, her, you're like, wait, but that wasn't what was said last month. So I'm like, I'd rather just not share it at all. But being in those spaces, I think having queer community at work is so invaluable, whether you work remotely, whether you're in person. And if you don't have those spaces, don't be afraid to start them, because there are so many people at work. Having started my own organization, I'm baffled. Now I share it like, oh, I do this thing outside of work, and I'm baffled by how many people are like, oh, I'm queer too. And I think it's so scary to put yourself in a position of vulnerability to say, hey, I'm queer. Especially if I want to distinguish between, there are folks where people are like, oh, I look at this person and I think that's a queer person. And I think there is a level of privilege when I walk in the world, or if I enter a room, somebody doesn't assume my queerness. And so I've decided I'm going to make it be known. And in those spaces, it is scary to do, but you give a voice for so many other folks that are looking to do the same.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's also our focus here, is like being able to show that to others and being like, it is possible to be out in your workspace, and there are spaces where you can be safe. And again, like the value of ERGs and creating those spaces. And if it's not there, creating them yourself. Someone has to do it.
Yeah. And it starts really like, you don't have to have a budget or a full-blown set of programming. It can just start with a coffee chat. Start small.
100%. Based on your personal experience, do you feel like STEAM fields pose barriers to entry or to success for our community?
I think any industry that requires higher education or a bachelor's degree poses a barrier. When we filter down who has access to opportunities, who has access to a 4-year college, who has access to enter the corporate world, marginalized groups become less and less represented. And that's something that, like, it was through experience that I witnessed. And I'm like, oh, I didn't see or realize this thing. So I think for the queer community, but also for like many underrepresented and marginalized groups, there are so many barriers to entry when it comes to STEAM fields if it requires a bachelor's degree. I like to think about there's a wheel of power and privilege, and queerness is one of the areas, but so is access to education, citizenship status. So like all of these are identities and parts of self that have to come into play and into conversation when it comes to queerness. That being said, I think that the right companies, the companies I've been a part of, and some of the work in DEI is how do we remove barriers to entry? Because why is it important? Does this degree serve its purpose? I know for me personally, for most of the careers that I've had, actually, like my degree wasn't what gave me the skills to succeed. It was the people I knew. It was my willingness to learn and that curiosity that I mentioned. If you're curious about learning new skills, that should be enough. But I would definitely look up companies that are removing those barriers, specifically when it comes to higher education, to see it then isn't only about higher education. It's actually about removing barriers as a whole, including your queer identity or making sure this is a place where you feel like you belong.
100%. Mm-hmm. And then for someone in your community, either your own communities online, but also any of our viewers, if they were thinking, I want to do what you do, where would you suggest, or where or how would you suggest that they start? And you can talk about this as like your content creation, as a founder, as a person in DEI, product, whatever that may be.
I think in all of the things that I started, I knew nothing. I knew truly zero when I started. But what allowed me to succeed and to grow was I was okay with being a beginner. Mm-hmm. I don't even think I'm advanced in any of these areas. I'm still learning. But allowing myself to be a beginner and also being kind of shameless in the fact that I was a beginner was what allowed these organizations or these opportunities to happen. Some of my oldest content is low quality, but I started somewhere. Some of the meetups I hosted for Queer Latinos, nobody came, but I still hosted another meetup. Mm-hmm. DEI has been a journey. Like there was things where I didn't have a linear career path. I was in a leadership position, but then moved to an individual contributor role because it felt right and because it was more aligned with the work that I wanted to do. So being okay with being a beginner and also being okay with being the first. I think it's really scary. We are a quarter of the way through this this century. And I'm like, why is it that it's 2025 and I'm creating an organization for queer Latinos and it feels like this should have happened decades ago? Mm-hmm. And through that, I've actually met a lot of organizations that are for these intersectional identities, but it's the storytelling piece. And they've mentioned like, we've had this nonprofit or we've had this organization, but we haven't figured out how to put it online. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to the org I run or the content I create or the DEI work that I do, what I've decided to do is in my own learnings, share them online, while also being my humorous, silly self and trying to make this place like, okay, I'm allowed to make mistakes because people that post things online aren't the only sole source of information and they aren't correct. I really want people to disagree with me and I really want people to know like, just because I put the video up or just because this is the theme of the meetup that we're hosting doesn't mean it's the one that will resonate. Do you have ideas? So that's been really helpful in the in Queer Latinas is having a group of about 10 or so volunteers that I'm like, hey, like we want to do this thing. Like, does this feel right? Does this sound right? So being a beginner and also getting feedback from strangers or friends is really invaluable.
I think that's so important to say. Like, discourse is what creates change also, because that disrupts our traditional path of thinking. And that's how we create new spaces and new ideas and it creates new pathways. But also just as a Latina, our experiences are not monoliths. Like your experience is very different from mine. It's going to be very different from someone else that's from a different background, from a different country, from if they were born in the US or abroad or whatever that may be. And it all changes and varies, and we're all experiencing things in a different way, in a different light.
Totally.
Awesome. And then I also want to give some space for you to talk more about what Queer Latinas is.
Yeah.
And like, how would you describe that in general? What is this organization? community you're building.
Yeah, the short of it all is Queer Latinos is an in-person and online community for queer Latinos. Why it started was because I couldn't find a space that celebrated my queerness and my Latinidad. I had gone to a queer Spanish meetup about 2 years ago in hopes of meeting other Latinos that wanted to practice their heritage language. And at this meetup, it was very diverse, which I loved, but I was the only Latina there. And I was a little surprised. I'm like, oh, okay. Noted. If this is one of the spaces where we would get to practice our heritage language, where are the other spaces? And from there, actually hours into that meetup, an Ecuadorian runs through and she's like, ay, lo siento por la demora. I'm so sorry for being late. And I was like, you're going to be my friend. And so, yeah, we're still friends. But from that, I created Queer Latinos simply I made a page online one day. I had no experience hosting meetups, but I was like, okay, like it's clear enough. So maybe people will join. And sometimes people did, sometimes people didn't. It was 6 months of just up and down going around. We're based in New York mostly, and I went to different boroughs. We went to the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, Brooklyn, just to get an understanding of like how many people are here. Sometimes nobody showed up. Sometimes a lot more people than I expected showed up. But Queer Latinos has started to build space around your heritage language. I say heritage language because Spanish isn't the only language spoken by Latinos, around supporting Latino-owned businesses, and simply around building meaningful connections. I think there aren't many spaces for queer people of color, so I try to make sure folks know it is Latina-centered, but that is not the only identity that's welcome here. I started Queer Latinas. One of the pillars was around practicing Spanish and also figuring out how do we remove gender or like make this a gender neutral conversation. And so when we had a lot of folks ranging from people that have never spoken Spanish, that are third or fourth generation, that want to reconnect with their heritage, to native speakers that just moved to the United States, there has been such a range of people. And where we decided to start was at the intermediate level, meaning, okay, do you have a grasp of the language? How do we degender it? Or, okay, you have a grasp of the language. Do you know about age? Do you know how to use the E? That's why we're called Queer Latines instead of Queer Latinx, because Latinx, the X is pronounced like an A in Spanish, but Latine is gender inclusive. So if you're non-binary, we want to make sure that you feel like you belong too. We're still figuring out like what does the range of this program look like based on how many people are at the beginner level versus how many people are advanced speakers that just want to improve their language, improve their Spanish around other queer folks. But for now, I think having the space where I've done many Spanish programs. My parents are bilingual, but we spoke mostly English at home. So I decided to improve my Spanish through my studies and through programs I joined. There's not been one program that their main focus is around queer Latino identities. So that is like, it's just so exciting. And I think will be so healing to not only have a space that centers language that isn't accepted by the RAE or Spain's program that manages all of Spanish, and instead have people that understand language is evolving, language creates belonging, and we want to be around people that even if they are queer and they've never used the E, now understand, oh, okay, I now know how to identify somebody else that uses they, them pronouns. So it's a journey. We're still figuring it out, but I think that more exciting than the actual learning itself is going to be more of the sense of belonging, which I think is just simply my purpose, is creating spaces where people feel like they belong.
I have a nemesis with the RAE.
Oh,
forever,
yeah.
That's a conversation for a different time.
But these classes are planned to be mostly online. That being said, we are partnering with a few Latino-owned bookstores. We're doing a book club around Puerto Rico national history, but we're trying to figure out, there aren't many queer POC brick and mortar stores. It oftentimes tends to be a collective that comes and goes somewhere. Preciosa Night, I think, is a perfect example of a queer Latina party that is in LA, sometimes comes to New York, sometimes goes to other cities, but we don't have an establishment. So in these Spanish classes, if we decide to go in person, it goes back to like, how do we support a Latino space? Or maybe even create one of the few queer POC brick and mortar spaces. there's so many spaces, or I'm so happy to see more queer POC spaces open up around going out. But as a person who goes out once a month, I really do like having spaces where it's more around a hobby or a park or a conversation. So yeah, that's been wonderful. And it exploded one day, truly one day. After 6 months, I was hosting meetups. We had hit 1,000 followers. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like now 30 to 40 people come to these meetups. And I had posted a little video being like, wow, like when you decide to host meetups for queer Latinos and you hit 1,000 followers, and then we went from 1,000 to 20,000.
Oh, wow.
And here we are. And now we have an online community where we have conversations. We do heritage language practice. We're actually opening up Spanish classes, which I'm really excited for in the fall. But it's been incredible. We have a lot of folks in California, in Los Angeles, and San Diego that are meeting up. But we have this online community where if you're not from New York, or if you're not from a city that has a lot of LGBTQ plus Latino presence, if you ever visit, we have people there for you. And I think that's been my greatest joy in building this community, is one, having strangers on the internet trust to join, to be like, okay, yeah, I identify with this. I want to join the online community. And then secondly, having people trust other strangers and be like, hey, we're all based in San Diego, let's meet up. And then they have a friend group. And if I ever visited San Diego, it's like, I know that there's a group of people within my community that I can meet up with.
100%. Yeah. Awesome. And then from all your experience as well, what changes do you think need to happen in workspaces to really embrace diversity authentically?
I think we need to stop putting the onus on marginalized groups to do the educating and have more learnings for allies and more upskilling for allies. Part of the work that I've done is when I first started in DEI, so much of the focus was on enabling employee resource groups. How do we give employees a budget? Whether you're part of our Pride ERG or our Black ERG or our Parents ERG, we'd give them a budget and be like, run with it. But then what that does is it puts the onus on somebody within their own community to nurture an event or connection within the community rather than having an understanding from folks outside of that community. So I think that there needs to be more spaces where we're upskilling allies and explaining the importance of certain holidays, the importance of checking in after world events. And some leaders do this already, but there needs to be at a larger scale, organizations that are pivoting their learning and development and their DEI programming away from the identity that they want to nurture and from the people who can help those folks feel like they belong. Yeah. Because belonging isn't about if I just see another Latina in the workspace in tech, but do I feel like I can talk about novenas or different Colombian traditions during Christmas with my boss if they're not Latino? And that I think is still a gap, but some companies are doing it, but I wish it was at a larger scale.
What is something that you were most proud of in your career so far?
Ooh, okay. One thing I'm really proud of from my work career is a BIPOC sponsorship program that I helped start from zero. So a lot of companies have mentorship programs. They'll have peer support groups, but they don't really have sponsorship programs. And the difference between a mentorship and a sponsorship program is mentors help you upskill. They help support, guide your career, but a sponsor can be a leader at the VP plus level, let's say, who is really providing you the network to kickstart whatever, or to really jumpstart whatever career pivot or career growth you want to have. So we did a lot of research and found that we need to look at not only retention or attrition, but employee satisfaction scores and see what are the employee groups that are most impacted. And in tech, not only is it women of color, it's also just women in engineering. So women in engineering and product roles tend to be underrepresented. So we found they actually had the same scores as a woman of color. So if a woman of color in marketing and a woman in engineering had filled out an employee survey, they had the same level of dissatisfaction, the same attrition rates. And what excited me about this was that we actually had two completely different groups. We could have a white woman in engineering and a Black woman in marketing. And it's like, wait, how are we having the same experience? It's like, it's different, but there is a shared understanding that there's a lack of belonging and we don't know why. Yeah. So in building this program, it was so exciting to build connections across completely different departments, completely different groups, and have these candid conversations of, why don't I feel like I belong? Why don't you feel like you belong? And how do we connect with our leaders to help make sure that we have these connections that we previously wouldn't have? There's a lot of research that talks about, there's a glass ceiling for women in corporate America or women in tech, and that there is a brick wall for women of color, meaning you don't even know, like you can't even see it. It's like, where do we go here? And I think that's actually the same for women in product and engineering. So to be able to just like have a data-backed understanding of, we really need to support these groups and we need to provide them sponsorship with VP Plus employees was really awesome, because it required a lot of buy-in, like the C-suite level, like, are you okay with this program? And if it's a yes, do you want to join? Yeah. So that I want more companies to focus on sponsorship. I think it is an invaluable program to have that gets VP Plus buy-in around something, even if you don't want to call it DEI, around understanding data shows that there are groups that are struggling and how do we support them?
100%. I love that. The difference between like a mentorship versus like a sponsor.
Yeah.
And just who's going to like come up to bat for you and like show you the ropes that you may not know or even there.
Yep.
Awesome. And then what advice would you give either your younger self or a young person, queer person that's trying to get into your field?
Just because you don't know doesn't mean you can't do it. I really think there's so much I don't know. And I'm doing it kind of blindly, like, I don't, maybe, like, let's try it. But then when you realize so many people don't know what they're doing, they're just doing it with a smile. So don't think if you don't have the right skill, if you don't have the education that's required, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Still try. I think trying and failing is still failing upwards, because you realize maybe I didn't like this thing, or it took me a couple of tries to get this right. I think with how much social media, how many people are online, I feel like millennials were the last generation of like, we got to see the transformation between flip phones to iPhones to now where we are. I think that there's a lot of instant gratification that makes us want to do skills that are easy to learn. So my suggestion is, just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And just because you don't learn it the first time doesn't mean that you're bad at it. There's going to be so many things that are going to require attempt after attempt after attempt to get good at it.
100%. It's like a lot of skills just take the time. It's just practice, and eventually you'll get there. Awesome. And then do you have any personal or professional goals that you want to achieve?
I would love to work for myself. I think I would love, and I put that out in the universe, I would love to build something to call my own. I'm doing that in part, but I also think being the first in my family in tech, in corporate, there's this level of like safety of, oh my gosh, this is really the thing. It doesn't get better than that. But I would love to create something to call my own and to have that be the thing. We don't learn about entrepreneurship. We don't learn about how to use your STEAM skills to build something for yourself. And I wish we had more people that were openly discussing that or sharing their journey. So yeah, I don't know what that looks like, but I would love to have something to call my own.
Awesome. And is there anything you'd like to add that maybe we didn't talk about?
I hope that the next generation of kids in STEAM or entering STEAM fields realize how invaluable that representation is and how absolutely important it is that they are there. Just to know you have a seat at the table, or if you're in an organization you don't feel like you have a seat at the table, sit there anyways. I remember I accidentally sat in a director's chair when I was an intern. I didn't know. I was like, this chair is free. It looks nicer and I want to be cozy. And that actually led to a conversation with this director who I was in consulting at the time, and he was like, why are you sitting here? And I was like, because it's cozy. But we had a coffee conversation, and I remember he shared with me, and he was a queer Black man, and we were in a majority white organization. I didn't know about his queerness. I was truly just sitting because I wanted to. And he said, there's not many people that look like you and I here. And I want to have a conversation with you to help you succeed. So what started as a sassy, like, why are you sitting here? Turned into like let's have a chat. And we went off site and had a really incredible conversation. I was 19 or 20 at the time. And he really paved the way and like, oh, I need to be the representation that I don't see. And I need to do it loudly. And on accident, I did that by sitting in a leader's chair that like was like, I want to spend some time to help you succeed here.
100%. I feel like that also goes into just how there's certain things that we're not taught.
Yeah.
Of like going into corporate spaces of like, oh, this is what you should be doing in these spaces. And that's just because our communities may be different and our worlds are different. I feel like he also might have seen that.
Oh, for sure. The more my one more thing to share is the more you are yourself, it is so surprising how well people respond to that. I wanted to get promoted. I wanted to climb like the career ladder. I wanted to make my family proud. And then I hit a point where I'm like, I'm doing all of these things and I'm not happy. Let me just be myself. I was like, why am I doing all of this? And then so I just decided to be like, no, I disagree with this program that we're running. And actually that builds so much more innovation where you feel like I'm not afraid anymore to disagree. And then it's much quicker to understand, am I in a psychologically safe environment or not? So part of it is like, I want you to be yourself, but also recognize, is this a place where I can safely be myself too? Because you need to protect your energy as well.
100%.
Yeah.
Awesome. And where can listeners find you?
Oh gosh, they can find me on LinkedIn at Queer Latinas, as well as on Instagram and TikTok for Queer Latinas. I also have my own personal content at Don't Call Me Liz. That is just a range of reflections from wellness to relationships to entrepreneurship. But I tend to do some crossovers with Queer Latinas when we're hosting events.
Awesome. And is there anything you want to plug?
Ooh. If you are queer and Latino or an ally or a person of color that's looking for more QTPOC representation and a space, you should join Queer Latinas. We're online. We host a lot of events in New York and sometimes in LA. I think that's pretty much it. Absolutely love the organization I started, and we want to make sure that people that are both a part of the community or want to be around a queer Latina centered space feel like they belong. So you should join us. You should check out our Instagram. That's where we post most of our meetups.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Paths from LGBT Tech. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to never miss another episode. Show your support and allow us to keep sharing these stories. Didn't get enough? Check out past interviews to hear from more amazing queer professionals in science, technology, engineering, art, and math. See you next time.